The movie starts in the quarry of the Slate Company, where men mine rocks with the help of dinosaurs. Mr. Cliff Vandercave, the company's vice president, explains to his secretary, Miss Stone, how he plans to embezzle money from the company's owner and go on a vacation. On the next scene, in a town called Bedrock, two friends, Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble, sing jokingly as they ride home from work. Barney thanks his best buddy Fred for helping him and his wife Betty with money to adopt their child. But Fred tells him to keep it a secret between them and not to tell his wife, Wilma. Fred later heads to his house to his pet dino and his daughter, Pebble. His wife, Wilma, asks about his day at the quarry. Later, Wilma asks Fred where he took the money from their savings account, and Fred tells her that he gave it to his friend Barney to adopt a baby, and she agrees with the decision. The following day, Fred and Wilma accompany their friends, Barney and Betty, who are anxious to meet their adopted child. Wilma asks Fred not to joke about the child's looks when it arrives, and the nurse jokingly brings them a baby monkey, making the couple puzzled but gives it to its monkey parents. So then she gives them another boy named Bam Bam, who was raised in the wild, while Fred jokes to his wife about the kid. Barney says the boy just needs a little loving, and when he tries to take him, the boy gets startled by the image capture and runs away. Later at home, the couple grooms the boy, who wildly plays around, calling Bam Bam and showing enormous strength, and learn to live with him. On the next scene is a bowling competition. Barney proposes a toast to his friend Fred, promising to pay him back for his goodness, while Fred sobs. Fred returns home to find his mother-in-law in their home, and the two begin to squabble over his marriage with Wilma, and later she leaves. In the quarry one afternoon, Mr. Vandercave announces a test for the vacancy of vice president at the Slate Company with an obscene salary. Fred begins to imagine himself in the role, terming it a chance to be somebody. Betty jokes to Wilma that if Fred wins the test, they could hire someone to do their laundry. The next day, Mr. Vandercave gathers the miners for the test. Barney watches as Fred struggles, and when he sees his poor answers, he remembers his vow to repay Fred and switches their results. Mr. Vandercave announces Fred as the winner, to everyone's surprise, as he happily celebrates and news of his success spreads throughout town. Fred wakes up the next morning and prepares for his new work. Going to work with Barney, he tells him his manifesto, and later goes to the company's building. Mr. Vandercave ushers Fred into his new office and introduces his secretary, Miss Stone, and leaves them. An office dictabird, which repeats what Fred says, explains to Fred about his position, while he brags to his quarry friends outside. However, Mr. Vandercave plans to use Fred to embezzle money from the company. He then asks Fred to fire his friend, Barney, claiming he scored the lowest and is a liability to the company, and threatens to fire him next if he doesn't. Going home, Fred is reluctant to tell Barney of the orders, and when they walk in the house, Fred is surprised to find Barney and Betty organized a party for him. Fred's mother-in-law congratulates him, while Barney gives Fred a present. Fred refuses the gift and instead reveals to him of his being fired, and later explains it was due to his low test score. The following day, Fred finds Mr. Vandercave, introducing to the board about his plan for modernization, which would increase their profit but lay off all workers, and also promises the owner, Mr. Slate, huge money to agree with him. Betty cries over their family's diminishing savings since Barney lost his job, while Wilma comforts her. Miss Stone later forces Fred to sign the bill papers without reading it. When she seduced him to divert him from reading the papers, Wilma walks into the office to talk about the Rubble's financial troubles, who just rent out their house to make ends meet. Later, they host the Rubble family under the roof. In the office, Fred complains to his secretary about the modernization plan. Miss Stone then tells Vandercave to call off the deal, since Fred is asking too many questions. But Vandercave forces her to stick to the plan. He then convinces Fred with a new wage bonus, which Fred uses to buy a new car and improve his life, claiming money buys happiness. Betty complains that Fred's changed since he became a big shot, living lavishly while they are poor. Mr. Vandercave forces Fred to sign more papers, so the miners could be laid off, and his dictabird calls him an idiot for signing without reading, but Fred ignores. Fred takes his wife and Betty to the cavern, and they discover Barney now works there as a waiter. Later, Barney reads on the news of the workers' layoff and confronts Fred, who thinks he had signed a vacation for them. They begin to quarrel with Fred, and Barney reveals he switched their test answers, causing Fred to land the job, which the Flintstones refuse to accept. Barney punches out Fred before leaving with his wife, and also leaves the Flintstones' house. Wilma asks them to stay, but they move out with their stuff. Fred tells his wife they could make new friends, but Wilma begins to destroy their new house equipment. She then carries her luggage and also leaves while Fred sadly watches. Barney, Betty, and Bam Bam set camp out in the wild and meets an angry dinosaur for stealing her egg. The quarry workers angrily protest against Fred, and he realizes in the office how Mr. Vandercave set him up by using his name to embezzle company money. Vandercave sets up Fred as the thief and threatens to turn him over, and Fred leaves the office. Betty and Bam Bam later visit Wilma at her mother's house. Wilma's mother asks her to remarry, but she refuses and defends Fred against the accusations on air. Fred disguises himself to drink with other quarrymen, but he is recognized and tries to escape. Meanwhile, Vandercave plans to travel for a business trip with the money and leave Miss Stone behind. Betty and Wilma sneak into Fred's office, and Vandercave sees them escaping with the office dictabird. The miners chase and capture Fred. While Barney sells snow cones, he finds them holding Fred, and when he says Fred was his friend, they capture him too and tie both of them for hanging. Fred and Barney comfort each other, with Fred calling him his best friend, but the angry mob interrupts, claiming they will bond in the afterlife. Betty and Wilma then appear at the quarry to defend Fred. Fred apologizes to his office dictabird, and the bird begins to narrate to the miners the tales of how Fred was caught in the web of power and deceit. The couples return home to find Wilma's mother and their pet dino tied up and their children Bam Bam and Pebbles missing, and a note asking them to bring the dictabird in exchange for their kids. They take the bird to Vandercave, who escapes with it, while Fred and Barney try to save the kids from the danger in the mines. The dictabird bites Vandercave's hand and runs away. Barney gets knocked out listening to his kid call him Dada for the first time. Miss Stones also helps Fred and the bird from Vandercave. Later, the cops arrive, and when Vandercave tries to escape, rocks tumble and concrete falls on him. The cops interrogate the dictabird and capture Miss Stone, the secretary, and Fred promises to defend her. Fred explains to Mr. Slade what happened to Vandercave, who is now turned into a statue by the concrete. Mr. Slate calls Fred a genius, saying that now man can shape their own destiny with concrete. He asks Fred to rehire all the workers and begin production of concrete to end the Stone Age, and promotes him to president of the concrete division. However, Fred turns down the offer, saying status turned him into something else, and now only asks for his old job back. Barney whispers into his ears, and Fred also asks for a paid vacation for all quarry workers. Mr. Slade agrees, and Fred leaves with his family while he calls him the best executive he ever had. The two families head for some breakfast, and Fred asks to borrow some bucks from Barney, but Barney refuses and they play around. Fred and Wilma return home, and Wilma playfully locks him out of the house, leaving Fred calling her out loudly, bringing the delightful film to an end. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.